Monthly show, Diaspora Dialogues. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be joining us from. Today, we are discussing a topic that is often not discussed, but we consider it quite germane to our national well-being and our national cohesion. I'll do the introductions shortly, but my name is Moses Ochonu, and I'm one of the hosts. I am a professor of African History at Vanderbilt University, and I'm joined by my two co-hosts. Professor Farooq Kperogi is a professor of journalism and new media at Kennesaw State University, where he's also the chair of the journalism program. He's well known as a commentator on national affairs. He's a columnist, one of the most visible columnists writing actively in the Nigerian media space today. He doesn't need a lot of introduction. He has a robust online presence in Nigerian intellectual circles. My second co-host is Dr. Osmund Agbo. Dr. Osmund Agbo is a physician, author, public commentator, and essayist. He is an all-rounder, as we used to say back in those days in Nigeria. He's a medical doctor. He saves lives, literally. But he also writes and publishes robustly. He's also an intellectual heavyweight in his own right. So that's the three of us. We are the co-hosts of this monthly show. Today, our topic is, I don't want to say controversial, but let me just say our topic is a very important one, and I want to make sure that I recite it correctly. So let me see here. And it is Ogu, I hope I'm saying it right, in the southwest, Igbos in the north, and Igala in the southeast. Nigeria's invisible minorities. That is our topic for today. And I am honored to welcome our guest who will help us make sense of this topic from an intellectual perspective, from his professorial pedestal, but also, interestingly, and even more interestingly, from his own experiential perspective. He is somebody who quite literally embodies some of what we are going to be discussing in terms of his own experiences. But he also brings to the table a vast knowledge of the subject matter. As someone who has researched on identities and on identities in our national conversation, his work has dealt with questions of diaspora, but not just diaspora in the traditional sense, but how the diaspora connects to the homeland and how together the diaspora and the home shape and reshape identities. He is a professor of Diaspora and Transnational Studies, and he's also the director of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ibadan. He is Professor Senayon OlaOluwa, and he's a very prolific writer. He's someone that I should say that I admire. I follow his work, and I hope that he can, bring some insight to bear, some of his own professional and experiential insights to bear on this topic today, and help us to understand how minorities are rendered invisible, how they are subsumed within larger identity formations, and how, in fact, minorities are made to exist in the shadow of majorities all over our country. You know, let me start with the narrative that all of us kind of take for granted, the narrative of Wazobia, right, which is the narrative of the big three, the so-called big three. We almost sort of take it as a shorthand for Nigeria as a nation, and we often don't question it. You know, Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo. And we think that Nigeria begins and ends with those identities. And we think that because our major regions, the North, the South, and the East, are dominated by these groups, that somehow these identities correspond to the Nigerian national identity itself. But we don't often stop to think about how the Wazobia construct renders invisible so many groups within these geopolitical zones or regions that are dominated by the so-called big three. In the Southwest, you know, as the title suggests, we have the Ogu people. We often think of the Southwest as Yoruba land, and we just throw that word out, you know, effortlessly in our discussions, in our writings, Yoruba land, and we think that it's coterminous with the Southwest, and that everyone in the Southwest, therefore, can be subsumed under this category, this ethnic category of Yoruba. But we have the Ogu, and Professor OlaOluwa can correct me later, but I don't know if that's the same ethnic group as the Gunuvi, because I have a friend who insists that she is Gunuvi, and she's talked a lot about it and tried to educate the public. But I don't know if these are two separate groups, but anyway, we'll get into that later. But I believe the Gunuvi are in Badagry local government of Lagos State. But the Ogu are in the Southwest, which is dominated by the Yoruba. In the Igbo heartland of the Southeast, you have several communities in Enugu and Anambra states who have Igala, clear, unmistakable Igala heritage that they are proud of. They bear Igala names. They have Igala culture. They proudly display their Igala culture. And many of them even proclaim their allegiance to the Ata of Igala. When an Ata was installed, a new Ata was installed 2 years ago, I believe, several of these communities sent delegations to pay homage to the new Ata of Igala. In the Northwest, similar minoritization occurs, where you have groups that from the outside are narrated and are understood as either Hausa or Fulani, right, in the northwestern states of the country. But there are actually several non-Hausa and non-Fulani groups, ethnic groups in the northwest. The southern Kaduna alone, which is in the northwest, contains more than 30, some people even claim as many as 45 ethnic groups, different, distinct ethnic groups, whose languages are, for the most part, mutually unintelligible. That's just one state in the northwest. In Kebbi State, you have the Kare, you have the Kambari, and you have several other smaller ethnic groups. In a state that is often understood from the outside as Hausa and Fulani. In fact, just as we're preparing to have this show, it was brought to my attention, and I shared it with my co-host, Farooq. It was brought to my attention that in Sokoto State, which is the heart of the caliphate, which is, everybody says Sokoto it doesn't get more Hausa than that, it doesn't get more Fulani than that, and nobody can imagine Sokoto being associated with any other ethnic group apart from Hausa and Fulani. But it was brought to my attention that there's actually a small minority of Bachama people. Now, I know Bachama because I went to school in Yola. I grew up partly in Yola. And I know that the Bachama are one of the major ethnic groups in Yola. They occupy several local governments. But it was brought to my attention that there's actually a small minority of Bachama people in Sokoto State. That I never heard of, that I never knew. because I had always assumed that Sokoto, was a Hausa and Fulani state. Now let's move to the Northeast. In the Northeast, it is the popular belief and understanding that everyone there is either Kanuri, Fulani, or Hausa. But there are literally hundreds of ethnic groups scattered around Gombe, Adamawa, Taraba, Yobe, Bauchi, and Borno states. And none of these states, none of them is exclusively Hausa or Fulani. Not even Gombe State and Bauchi State, where the Hausa and the Fulanis are the majority. No. In both of those states, you have several smaller ethnic groups that most people outside of the Northeast, outside of those states, don't even know about because of the overwhelming and suffocating narrative of majoritarian ethnic formations. In the North Central, there is no need to dwell on the North Central because it is arguably Nigeria's most ethnically diverse region. But yet, you still find people, especially in southern Nigeria, who assume that everyone from the the North Central, is Hausa because it says North, right? It's in the North. So technically, everybody from the North is understood in certain quarters of Nigeria as being Hausa. Even in the South-South, sometimes a lot of people from outside the South-South equate it with, they have their own big three, the Ijo, the Bini, and the cluster of ethnic groups that we call Calabar, which is actually made up of different ethnic groups, Efik, Ibibio, and the rest of them. So we often think of the South-South as just being composed of these three, Bini, the Calabar, and the Ijo. But that's far from the truth. There are actually many smaller ethnic groups in the South-South that somehow have been subsumed under the ethnic umbrella of, this major ethnic group, the Bini, the Ijo, and to some extent this ethnic handle that we call Calabar. Now that's the national picture. When you go to the subnational level, when you go to the different states, the same majoritarian ethnic suffocation and ethnic invisibilization occur as well. The same thing occurs in the states. The majoritarian dominance exists, and it renders many smaller ethnic groups invisible and make them struggle to exist and to thrive in the shadow of bigger groups in those states. I'll use my state as an example. I come from Benue State. It is very common all over Nigeria for people to assume that Benue is made up of the Tiv and the Idoma, because these are the biggest ethnic groups in the state. But the state has sizable populations of minority ethnic groups in the Tiv-dominated areas. You have the Tulo, you have the Jukun, and I think there's one other one that I'm forgetting. So it's not exclusively, even the Tiv-dominated, it's not exclusively Tiv. You have ethnic minorities that are struggling to be recognized in their own rights as distinct ethnic categories. But the overbearing, majoritarian politics of Tiv ethnicity does not allow them to do that. Now, in my zone, in the Idoma area, in the Idoma dominated area, you have ethnic minorities such as the Igede, the Akwea, and the Ufia. Yet, when you travel all over Nigeria, as soon as you say you are from Benue, they'll say, "Oh, are you Tiv or are you Idoma?" Nobody asks you whether you are Igede, you are Akwea, or you are Ufia, because again, nobody sees these people. These people are invisible to the outside world. In the same state, in the same zone where I come from, in Doma, there are even Igbo communities whose ancestors migrated to at least 3 local governments and who have been there for several generations, who pay their taxes there, who cast their votes in elections there. They are practically Benue indigenes, and they get certificates from the local government saying that they are indigenous of Benue State. They have representation in the local government. And yet, outside of Benue State, if anybody were to tell you that they're actually Igbo-speaking peoples who are from Benue State, who claim Benue as their state, you would say that they are crazy. So these kinds of identity complications, complexities, and I don't want to say anomalies, because they are not anomalies. They're actually quite normative and quite common all over the country. It's just that we are not aware of them. But they complicate and they disturb and they disrupt our identity, narratives, and categories. Because we like to divide our country into neat categories, very linear, very neat, and we don't often entertain alternative identity formations or alternative identity claims that disturb those narratives. But my state is just one state, quite frankly. I know that all over Nigeria, that there are many states with similar ethnic configurations and complexities. So, but we want to use one particular case in this discussion as a touchstone and as a point of reference to speak to these broader issues of how minorities all over the country are rendered invisible by majority ethnic formations. And we want to use the case of the Ogu people. And I understand that they are found in Ogun State and in Lagos State, but maybe that's not entirely correct. So that is where Professor OlaOluwa comes in. Let me take the liberty of disclosing that he himself is Ogu, is of Ogu ethnicity. And I don't want to give away too much because I know he has a lot to say on this matter. He has written about it. And I'm happy to see Shane Williams, Professor Dr. Oluwaseun Williams, with us because he wrote a recent piece that I read with so much interest in the Republic. We published a recent piece on the same Ogu people, arguing essentially that the Southwest, and that was a very bold argument, that the Southwest is not Yoruba land, and people should stop referring to the Southwest as Yoruba land, that the Southwest is a multi-ethnic region. And he gave the example of the Ogu. I believe he himself is Ogu by ethnicity. And he says, well, the Southwest is a multi-ethnic region and should be recognized in that light. So I have spoken enough. I have introduced our guest. So let me start by turning it over to Professor OlaOluwa. Professor OlaOluwa, you heard my long-winded, almost rambling introduction there, but you get what Farooq, myself, and Osmund are trying to get at. You get what we're trying to unravel and trying to get at. Before we get into the Ugu case specifically, what are your thoughts on what I just laid out? Okay. Well, in the chat, Dr. Oluwaseun Williams is saying that he's Ogu. He's confirming in the chat that he's actually Ogu himself. Fantastic. So, but before we go into the Ogu case and use it as a launch pad to talk about all these other examples, and we're going to open up the discussion later on to our listeners, what are your thoughts on why and how these majoritarian ethnic identities and formations across Nigeria's regions and nationally are subjugate and suppress and render invisible minority groups within these regions? I want you to speak to the why and how. How have we come to a point where there's so much ignorance nationally about the very existence of minorities within all these different regions and different states? Why some people are seen and others are not seen. Some people are accorded recognition and some people are not. So that's what I want you to speak to first, Professor.
Right. Thank you very much. The co-host of this platform, I must say that I feel flattered to have been invited to share my views on this particular topic. because I seriously think that there are better people. And of course, from the introduction which by Professor Ochonu, my conclusion is that you have already delivered the keynote. And sincerely, I'm grateful to you, to Professor Kperogi, and the other professor in the list of co-hosts. How do we begin? Talking about Nigeria's invisible minorities, clearly that also implies that there are visible minorities because, for instance, the Fulani will claim that they are a minority group, but we also know how very visible they can be. Saying nothing of a couple other groups across the country that, in spite of such designation, are considered to be very, very assertively visible. But there are so many others that fall into this category of the invisible minorities, like the topic has decided to take maybe just 3 instances as representative just in this context, because every other such group is representative in its own right. So we talk of, the Igbo that are also found in northern Nigeria, in Benue State, for instance, or in Kogi State, or when we begin to talk about Igala people that you can find also across in some southeastern states, and you begin to wonder, where do we go from here? Or when we talk of Diogu, the pronunciation, Professor Ochonu, is Ogu. Yes, there is also Gunuvi, there is also Gunu, there is also Gun. All these words that reference the same identity, but sometime in the 80s, some Ogu intellectuals came together and formalized the adoption of Ogu, OGU, as representative. But in the popular imagination in the Southwest, people just simply refer to the people as a group. And that is derogatory, especially when we hear it from our neighbors, the Yoruba, especially when they tell you a big Gunieni, that you is like, are you a fool? So to an average Yoruba, to say you are a Igbo is to say you are a fool, or to say, hey, do you get what I'm saying? Or have I been speaking Igbo to you? Meaning it's like, have I been speaking, Barbadash, so and all that and all that. But that's not actually where to start from for me. I think it is what it is. Unfortunately, we have to begin with colonialism. Colonial violence, in my estimation, is not only about those visible reference points in historical scholarship. Colonial violence goes beyond that to reference the first, an artificial mapping that preceded the so-called administration of the colonies. The gross disregard for the various distinct indigenous formations set or laid the foundation for how certain groups today are categorized as minorities, while others are considered to be in the majority. And so the first thing to talk about is, for me, the so-called international boundaries set and through which colonialism played out for the decades it lasted, even if we can always ignore that to say that colonialism began, several centuries before. But in terms of what happened from the late 19th century, we must say that it laid the foundation. Let me just put it that way. And by laying the foundation, we discovered how groups that ordinarily, in historical terms, never had anything to do together to that point of becoming co-colonized groups came into this kind of forced cohabitation. And ever since, that has continued. But we need to go beyond colonialism quickly to begin to talk about what I call coloniality as continuity. Of course, we all do know that although colonialism ended in principle, it continued, and that is why scholars have found a way of referencing that continuity as coloniality. And in that coloniality, we begin to see the material consequences of colonialism, whereby in the post-colonial context, taking Nigeria for instance, those who were suddenly invested with majority identities, so-called, only began to continue from where the colonial masters stopped. And so if in the Southwest, for instance, you suddenly discover that you are Yoruba, and then you just see yourself as privileged in the Southwest, and you can go everywhere, and there is a way that disrupted relations. And so in the West, generally, you talk about maybe 95% of people being Yoruba, but again, we'll still have to acknowledge the fact that in, say, Ondo State, for instance, there are Ijo people who, like my people today, answer Yoruba names generally. In fact, for those who care to, pay attention, somebody like Omoyele Sowore will tell you that he is of Ijo descent, and but I mean, it is what it is what it is. Today is Omoyele Sowore, but when the chiefs are down, you begin to wonder why he is Omoyele Sowore. Just as everybody wonders why I am Senayon OlaOluwa. I mean, I met a scholar some years back in Ethiopia during a lunch break. She came from Benin Republic, and then took a look at my tag and then said, "So tell me, how can Senayon also be OlaOluwa?" Because it's just combining two different two names from two different cultures, and then how do you navigate? But these are the realities of coloniality as people face this burden, have to bear this burden of being invisible minorities. So we talk of the Ogun in Ogun and Lagos State. You talk of the Igbo in a local government like Ado local government in Benue State, where you have visible communities like Eze Okoha, community, or Eze Oka. These are, authentic indigenous Igbo communities in Benue State, and then when they introduce themselves geographically, they are northerners who speak Igbo, and some people say to Fiakwa for lack of knowledge, but that's the truth of the matter. Or in Igbo North local government in Ogun State, where you also have, as Ochonu said earlier on, the Idoma people and all. Or you come to Edo State, where you begin to talk about the Banker people who are Igbo. We will still come back to all that at other times. So you find all these instances as illustrations of invisible minorities. But I want to go beyond this to look at what I call this invisibility and the complicity of the formal curriculum. Here, I would like to talk about the extent to which the formal, do I say colonial and post-colonial formal education has underwritten the invisibility of these groups. And I'll do this with some illustrations. I know quite well that in my own part of Nigeria, up to the maybe 80s, your parents summoned the courage to take you to school, and then they were asked, "What's your name?" And your dad tells the teacher, and then the teacher says, "Sir, your son's name is not writable." And at other times, they ask you, can you tell me the meaning of that name? I said, oh, okay, well, can we then call it Olatunji? And that's, for instance, the case of a cousin of mine who retired some time ago from the Ogun State civil service. So one day I called and I said, bros, how far now? Did you become Mr. Olatunji? And then he said, you know my father is Setonji. I said, yes. Oh. So, and then he said, I was originally enrolled in the village. I said, yes. Then that came after some years and took me to town. And there, on the day I was taken to school, he said, what's your name? I said, Jacob. And then he said, Baba, what's your own name? The Baba said, Setonji. And then the teacher said, Baba, that name is not writable. But pronounce it again. The man said Setonji. And then the teacher said, that name sounds like Olatunji. So let's write Olatunji down. And that was it. He went to school as the son of Olatunji, came back the same day as, he went to school as the son of Setonji, which literally in Ogun means the destiny's turn, or, it's like God's appointed time. And then he came back as Olatunji, which means something completely different. Now, that for me is how we begin to illustrate what I call the complicity of the formal curriculum. And I would like to go a little back to the colonial period, using one of the childhood memoirs of Ngugi, where he talks, about going to school and becoming shocked to realize that the colonial curriculum was completely outside the context of the indigenous Kikuyu knowledge system. So they were Kikuyu children who read everything about history, about geography, and to his chagrin, nothing was ever mentioned in the colonial curriculum. That becomes how we can illustrate what I earlier on referenced as the coloniality of invisibility. And so in the post-colonial era, that is exactly what we find, the repetition of colonial exclusion of these minority groups from the curriculum. So first, it is about linguistic exclusion. Up to today, April 25, 2026, Ogu is not taught anywhere in Lagos and Ogun State. It's not taught as it's neither a language of instruction nor a subject for any form of examination. Yet the national policy on education will recommend that children should be taught in the indigenous languages, in their mother tongues in the first few years of admission to school. In our days, you could only speak Yoruba if your parents enrolled you in school in the 70s. And in the first 2 years, our seniors were always being brought from primaries 4, 5, and 6 to interpret what the teachers were teaching us It was in itself some kind of palaver. You thought first in Ogu, and then you go to school, you began to learn Yoruba, and you did that, and by the time you were in Form 3, English was introduced, and at that point, some people literally just couldn't cope. They became so frustrated, they dropped out of school because, I mean, having to battle all these at once, and realizing that your language is not a language at all, you to identify with within the school system. So the complicity of the former curriculum manifests as linguistic exclusion, as general. Another thing is it also results in what I call general epistemic exclusion. You don't read anything about, you can't find anything in the books beginning from the elementary schools about your people. And that in itself translates to the imposition of the cultural knowledge forms of the majority ethnic groups. Yeah. And so we read everything about the Alafin, read everything about the Oni of Ife, read everything about Oyo Empire and everything. And nobody was talking about our own people. Nobody was talking about anything that had to do with us. Our language was not referenced. And at times, when you even try to disrupt it, you also face their consequences. In the 90s, I remember that when we were in the university, was it a class of geography where a professor was listing the groups in Ogun State? And a student, raised his hand to tell the professor, but we also have the Ogu in Ogun State. And I think the professor chased him out for being disruptive.
Wow.
And that's the kind of stuff we face. And then it goes beyond that because it is about coloniality. I also talk about the repetition of, textual practice in the casting of aspersions and animadversions. Just as you read in, say, The Heart of Darkness, animadversions about Black people, about the comparison of River Thames and the negativity of River Congo as the fuel to Thames. That's the kind of stuff you also find the minority ethnic group, invisible minority ethnic groups, that's part of what they face. I remember one very popular encounter in our elementary school days where the only narrative in a major Yoruba book, Alawiye, whether Apakaran for primary 4 or primary 5, was about the only time an Ogu character was mentioned was to show that he was a thief who stole a pig. And then every time when you say you are Ogu, people just say, oh, Agose Dielede, because it's about one character called Agose who stole a pig. The kind of stuff you read in Shakespeare about Black people and all. So you now in coloniality, you begin to find the repetition of such, whereby majority ethnic groups cast aspersions on invisible minority ethnic groups, even to the point of integrating them into the curriculum. Now, how do I make sense of this? In an ongoing study of mine, this is what I call the skepticism of pedagogical containment. Sometimes you just wonder why certain forms of knowledge are not integrated, because knowledge production is also about power, and those who preside over it decide what should be included and what to be excluded. That is what I reference as the skepticism of pedagogical containment. And some people ask me, so if you then teach Ogu in school, how many people will learn? What is it going to add? What value is it going to add? Have they ever produced a governor? Will they ever, can they ever become this? Or can the Igbo people in Benue State ever be the governor, contest to be the governor of Benue State? And so why bother yourself? These are the challenges we face. And when all this happened, you discover that there is a sense in which forms of knowledge about these invisible minority groups become what concentrate, so to say, into forming what I call part of forbidden epistemologies. So, I mean, people just say certain things, you just talk about certain people, they just tell you, no, it doesn't matter. You don't have to bother yourself about them. And then it goes beyond that to reinforce Professor Ochonu's introduction. We take it for granted that there are only three ethnic groups in the country. So just say Wazobia. A few weeks ago, I was reviewing a technical report for a research team, and I was shocked to realize that after collecting data in the diaspora, in China to be specific, and after identifying Nigerians from at least 27 states, and the states are listed in the table. Kebbi, Nasarawa, Edo, Delta, Akwa Ibom, Cross River, Enugu, and all. About 27 states. And then ethnicity, 3, Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo. So I wrote them, what is the meaning of this? How can you tell me that Kebbi is just Hausa? How can you tell me that Akwa Ibom is Igbo? How do you tell me that Kaduna is just Hausa? So this is an illustration of the enormity of what I call the complicity of the formal curriculum and how it serves to how do I put it now? Consolidate, unfortunately, the invisibilization of these people. And when all this happens, I'm trying to round up now because we can as well begin to talk about what I call the material consequences of the orchestrated invisibility, because in themselves, they are not natural, they are artificial, and because that happens, there are so many devastating consequences at the individual and social level. First, for me, is how all this brings about what I call the ambivalence of identity. I'll begin with my own people, the Ogu people. You meet Ogu people, and sometimes some of them just say, oh, we're also Yoruba. And then you say you're also Yoruba, you then begin to have some conversations or go in search of certain benefits. And then the Yoruba will tell you, no, you don't belong. Even if your name is OlaOluwa Adebola, we know you are not. That ambivalence again manifests, in what I call nominal disruptions. I mean, every time I am a controversial figure because I am Senayon, and then my surname is OlaOluwa, surname for that matter. And then I come back to tell people that I am not Yoruba, and people just say, come on, you must, I mean, what is going on here? And so you find this kind of nominal disruption, nominal ambivalence, and then, people are left so confused. Many years ago, when I was teaching in a private secondary school in Warri, this sort of debate, I had just joined the school, started off one day, and we spent about 3 or 4 hours on it after school, because the teachers were like, you have to persuade us that you are not Yoruba. How can your name be OlaOluwa and you are from Ogun State? And then you tell me, and it went on and on and on and on and on. Right there on that day, I also discovered, the seriousness of the complicity of the formal curriculum, because one of the teachers said, you know what, I read linguistics in the university, and I have never heard any name like Ogu from Lagos any ethnic group like Ogun, or any language called Ogun from Lagos or Ogun State. You know, the complicity of the formal curriculum. And when it works that way, it brings about identity denial. So many things. One day a colleague said he went to collect data in a corporate office in Lagos. It was and he had to spend like 3 or 4 days. So he was so enthusiastic, introducing himself as an Oguman, very proud Oguman, and interacting with everybody. And then on the third day, one of the top management guys called him to his office and spoke with him with a lot of sobriety. Said, "Hey man, how did you do it?" I said, "How did you do what?" I mean, the confidence with which you introduce yourself as an man. You know, in my own case, another man, I just couldn't cope. This man's name was Mr. Afolabi. And he then said, "You know what? I am actually Afodeu." But at some point, I changed it to Afolabi. You know, the funny thing is, some names in Ogun sound like Yoruba, but they have completely different meanings. I mean, if for instance you tell me you are Jide from Lagos or Ogun State, especially certain local governments, I'll have to ask you whether you are Yoruba. I'll ask you, are you Jide or Jidenu? Because you may have shortened Jidenu to Jide. Okay. Jide has a completely different meaning, maybe something like maybe Baba Jide or whatever in Yoruba, that is like a reincarnated father or whatever. But when you say Jidenu, Jide, and then the verb is Deji, and Deji is another word in Yoruba. But when you say Deji in Ogun, that is to hope. Double something. You can see how completely different they are, and these challenges persist because they also result in socio-political and economic exclusion of the people. So many people have changed their name because they said, if you don't change your name, you're not going to get a job with the Lagos state government, or you're not going to get a job with the Ogun state government. Somebody once changed their name from their Ogun name to something like Lawrence, because they said, if I didn't change the name, my fiance said she would not be able to introduce me to her parents because they would not get married. They would not want their daughter to get married to an ordinary Oguman, Egulason Lasan. And all these have consequences. So quickly, I'm going to talk about what I call the consequences.
Can we, Prof,
yes.
Can we reserve that for just a little later? I want to be able to give opportunity to my co-hosts to also engage you. Right. Normally I would have maybe interjected earlier, but I was learning so much. I was fascinated by the stories you were telling. I was seduced and captivated by, and I'm sure our audience is learning as well, because some of these things I had never, I was so just completely enamored by what you were saying that I didn't want to stop you, because I think it's a lot of education, a lot of new information for me specifically. So I like the way that what you underscored there as these majoritarian ethnic configurations. They are not victimless ethnic games. They have actual consequences. They exclude people from opportunities. They prevent people from accessing certain things. And in a way, people have to deny themselves and erase themselves, in order to access things that normally should accrue to them. That is tragic. That is really tragic. That you have to essentially erase who you are and deny who you are, and that is why this invisibilization, the majoritarian ethnic tyranny, is such a serious issue. And I'm glad that you raised that. And I also like this idea that you introduced stereotypes, the tropes of aspersion and insult that you introduced into the conversation, whereby basically, if you fall into some of these categories, it means that you wouldn't even want to associate with the category openly, because now they've been associated with all kinds of negative character traits and so on and so forth. Whether they are cast as jokes, or it doesn't matter. Nobody wants to. So I like the fact that you emphasize that there are stakes involved. These are not just symbolic stakes of people being proud of who they are, taking somebody's symbolic pride. No, 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 no. Actual consequences, jobs, opportunities, political access, and so on and so forth. So with that said, let me turn it over to Professor Kperogi, to my colleague Farooq. I'm sure he has other questions, and then from him we'll go to Osman, and then after that maybe we'll take some audience questions and thoughts. Farooq.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this, Professor OlaOluwa. You just like Moses said, your presentation was so powerful, so irresistible, so arresting that I too, wanted it to continue. I have interacted with an Ogu person who is interestingly on this conversation. He was the go-between to get access to you. And he has told me a lot of these stories. I also, in several ways, embody this conversation. I come from a minority group called the Batunu, that Yoruba people call Bariba, who are spread between Nigeria and Benin Republic. And so I share that in common with the Ogu people who are also in Benin Republic. So the south of Benin Republic are my people who are in the north of Benin Republic. And this all goes back to what you said earlier about the colonialism, the boundaries they erected, the artificial boundaries they erected, and also the sort of education they instituted that has created what I once called a know-nothing nation, particularly in Nigeria. We have been pre-programmed to reduce our complexity into two easily identifiable ethnic groups. This was a consequence of colonialism's inability to deal with the labyrinthine complexities of our ethnicity. And they are actually borrowing a leaf from themselves. If you look at France, for instance, France is not just made up of French people. They had multiple languages that were mutually unintelligible. And they had a deliberate, systematic, sustained act of erasing every other ethnicity, every other language group, so that everyone could become French. That hasn't succeeded in Belgium. It has succeeded in several other places. They are struggling to erase the Scottish, who had lived in the British island before the English came, leading to the irony that Africans had been in England, in Britain, hundreds of years before even the English. But I'm not going to go into that. But I also had an experience of someone from Edo State who reached out to me, had been reading me and said, "Your last name confuses me. I know this couldn't be Hausa because the KP sound doesn't exist in Hausa. I have never seen anyone bear that." And then he said, "But are you Yoruba?" Then I said, "Do you see KP in Yoruba?" He said, "No, I don't." They said, "Okay, certainly." He said, "But I know you cannot be Igbo." Then he said, "But so are you really Nigerian? You're neither Hausa, nor Igbo, nor Yoruba. Are you Nigerian?" And the irony of her question was lost in her because she's from Edo, and I could tell because of my own intimate familiarity with Nigeria's ethnic complexity. Then I say, "Oh, that must mean you are not Nigerian as well." He said, "Why?" He said, "Because you are also neither Igbo, nor Yoruba, nor Hausa." Then he said, "Oh, I get it. I get the point you are trying to make." I actually wrote a column on that. She's from Edo State, but she too had been pre-programmed to conceive of Nigeria as consisting of only three ethnic groups, and anyone who falls outside of those must not be Nigerian. Although she too doesn't fall out, within those categories. So it's a reality we encounter, and there's also an element of escapism, what I find comforting escapism by people who are majority. And I saw one comment on Facebook saying this discussion is divisive, we shouldn't be talking about our ethnicities, and that we should talk of ourselves as Nigerians, that these differences are immaterial. But no, Professor OlaOluwa has shown very brilliantly and accurately how these things have material consequences. But I'm going to go beyond the material consequences. They also have psychic consequences. If you are judged or excluded systematically on the basis of attributes and characteristics that you did not choose. No one chose to be born into any ethnic group. You just found yourself there. But if that category, your ethnic category that you grew up, that you're socialized into, is stereotyped in a very negative way, to the point that you're even ashamed to be associated with it, just so that you can be incorporated into an ethnic identity that you don't belong into, but into which you would not be accepted when it comes to distributing material resources, it creates a psychic imbalance in you. It creates a question of who am I? It does a lot of violence to your self-esteem, to your self-estimation, to your self-construal. And when you have someone who has no belief in themselves, who questions their own identity, I mean, it affects not just their material, the access to material prosperity, but also their sense of self. It does a lot of violence to their sense of self, and there's no more violence that can be more intimate than a violence to the self. So when we talk about this, it's not because we want to divide Nigeria or we want to proclaim victimhood. It is that these realities exist to pretend they don't exist and to exclude people on the basis of these identities. It's a lot of trouble, and that's why I'm an advocate for constitutionalizing power rotations, so every sense, every part of every country of Nigeria in this country would feel a sense of belonging. So that's my own take on this. I have written a lot on this issue, and I'm very passionate about it because I realize that there are way more people who are caught up in this situation than we care to admit. My question is going to be, I'm going to dwell a little bit on the linguistic dimension. So what is there's a professor here in the United States who said that the Ogu people or the Ogu language is constitutive or is part of the larger Yoruba group. And and you've heard a lot of Yoruba scholars talk about the Yoruba in Benin Republic. And when they talk about the Yoruba in Benin Republic, they're not referring to the Sabe people who are incidentally in Borogu. That's in my part of Benin Republic. And but they're talking about the southern Benin Republic, which is where the Ogu people, predominate. They talk of them as the Yoruba of Benin Republic. That narrative hasn't been challenged. And I wanted to speak to this. So what would you say about the mutual intelligibility of Ogu and Yoruba? When a person speaks Ogu, would a Yoruba person understand? I mean, I don't mean 100% intelligibility, but is there sufficient lexical similarity that a very careful listener will be able to pick on what the other person says if they just speak their language? For instance, if an Ekiti person speaks Yoruba, the Oyo person will have a lot of trouble understanding them. But then you can tell that these are similar languages that diverged over time.
Exactly.
But is that the case with Ogu?
Thank you very much, Professor Kperogi. The scientific truth of the matter is that Ogu is a distinct language, so distinct that there is no mutual intelligibility between it and Yoruba. I mean, Yoruba is a language on its own with so many dialects. It's the same with Ogu. Ogu has over 50 dialects.
Wow.
To the extent that sometimes we almost need interpreters to understand what some other Ogu people are saying. The only time you know they are Ogu is because Ogu people have a way of answering names along the same pattern. Almost, close to 85% of Ogu names come in the Alada dialect. Senayon is an Alada dialect. And then you want to talk about some of the names that come in Seto, Glo. In fact, there is a dialect called Glo, as in GLO. and you tend to think that is the Glo network provider. You have to Glo, you have Sector, you have Kento, you have Toli. You know, it's such that sometimes you live. Okay, let me tell you about my own experience. I grew
So with
up.
a language group, it's accurate to say it's even a language group.
Ogu and Yoruba do not belong to the same group. Ogu belongs to what we call, linguists call the Be clusters.
Oh, okay.
Ogun, Fon,
Yes.
Evi. Yeah, when an Evi man speaks, I know that to a certain extent, I can still understand what they are saying. I mean, the first time I encountered Kofi Awono in high school, reading his poetry, I had to go back home and check with my dad that I read about a Ghanaian poet. And in his Song of Sorrow, I encountered names like Agosu and all. And I'm like, these are good names. He said, okay, then I understand that. So there is a linguistic belt to which Ogu belongs.
Yes.
From southwest Nigeria, Ogun and Lagos State in particular, to Benin Republic and to Togo and to the Volta region in Ghana. That is where they belong. Yoruba people, except they integrate, they can't understand Ogu. And let me just give one more illustration about numerals. Yoruba numbers are rooted in just 1 to 10, or maybe 0 to 9. 1 to in when they get to a wa, 10. They start 1 again, like the Arabic numerals. But the Ogu numerals, fall within. Well, I mean, it's comparable to the Roman numeral. When you count 1 to 5, you start 1 again. So you say Ode, Awe, Aton, Ene, Aton. That's 5. 6 is like 5 and 1 again. 5 and 6. You begin to say Chiropo. Some say Isaiah. Chiropo, Shianwe, Shianton, Shiene. When you get to 10, Ao, you start 1 again. When you get to 15, you start. But Yoruba, you go to 10, then you continue, you start 1 again. And that in itself alone. And then in terms of the alphabet, we have Z in our language. There's no Z in Yoruba. We have V in our language. We have a sound like the, although Dotu, and all. We have those sounds. And these were sounds for which we were thoroughly beaten in elementary schools because we were forced to learn these other sounds, and there was a way we suffered the interference of mother tongues, and we had to go through it all. But then here we are, and maybe I should also add this, and yet for even exhibiting competence. In those, I think from the 90s up to recently, Yoruba was made compulsory in the Southwest, whether you were a science student or in high school or not, whether you were and so there were cases in my community of people who answered pure Ogu names, who made A1 in Yoruba, and their result would be automatically flagged, seized for weeks or months, until they then compare their results, their Yoruba results with the other subjects. I said, okay, this must be an outstanding candidate. So after 7 or 8, out of 9 subjects, 8 will be released, and Yoruba will be seized, only to be released later because this is generally outstanding, because it's like, how can a Hosu Azimaba make A1 in English when an Afolashade Abiodun has made F9, and stuff like that. So so you even get punished at times, for exhibiting competence in Yoruba because your name does not in any way, point to your familiarity with the language. But these are 2 completely different languages. Ogu has its own dialects, and there are so many, just the way Yoruba has it.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating. This is just incredibly insightful and fascinating. I feel like I'm in school learning. I'm just sitting in a classroom and I'm absorbing all this knowledge. I want to correct, something that came up earlier. Not correct, but I want to add. I should have added it in my introductory remarks that in Kogi State there are also Igbo communities. There are
Yes,
Igbo communities in some local government, maybe one or two local governments in Kogi State as well. And they speak Igbo, they have Igbo names, but they are geographically in Kogi State, and they are indigenous of Kogi State. And I've seen videos of them. So that's another wrinkle. It just bolsters our case even more. It just adds to our evidence of this ethnic complexity that we are trying to underscore here. Um, so I just like the way that we are framing this conversation, but I want to turn over the conversation to Osmond. Osmond is here. I don't know if he can. I know he's
yeah.
busy with a lot of things.
Osmond told us that his son
He's
is going for a prom.
yeah. If he's not
It's
able
a
to, if he's
yeah,
too
he's not able
busy,
to.
then that's
He's
fine. But I
I'm
want
even
to,
surprised that he's here. But
yeah, but that's fine
Osmond,
if he's
let
not
me
able.
see.
He's probably
Let
at
me.
his
Yeah,
son's prom.
he's a co-host, so he can unmute himself.
Mm.
If you're in a position to speak, let us know. If you're not, no problem.
No problem. Then we can just move right along. But
And there's I want to address very quickly something
sure,
a comment that I saw on Facebook where someone
sure,
was saying that
sure.
there's a difference between a tribe and an ethnic group, and I don't know what they're trying to hint at. This is a subject matter about which I'm extremely passionate, but that I have given up on now because I realize that with linguistic traditions, people don't change the way they speak because someone somewhere who thinks he knows or she knows tells them not to. Traditions, linguistic traditions take a life of their own. So I have honestly, and Moses will bear me witness, we've written a lot about the inappropriateness of the term tribe to describe, ethnic formations. It's and several even white anthropologists have confessed that yes, when you use the word tribe to describe a people, you are implying that they're primitive, they're preliterate, and they are bound by a common ancestor, live in a small place. So the whole idea of tribe, no one ever talks about white people being tribes. That word is reserved for non-white people. And that's why even the term, the adjectival form tribal means primitive. It's tribal areas, tribal communities. These are all, it's almost a synonym for primitive. And someone asked me one day here in the United States, I said, what's a tribe? And I said, well, I don't belong to it. And I didn't even ask, I didn't say, I didn't. And I said, oh, my tribe, what's your tribe? And he said, oh, me tribe, we don't have tribes. And I said, okay, why don't you have tribes?
Mm-hmm.
Because he said, well, I know I'm of Irish descent, but the Irish are not a tribe, we're a people, And then I stopped. And then when she saw my face and the implication of what she just said dawned on her, he said, oh, now I see. I'm sorry. Yeah, no one should be called a tribe. Because in the depths of our imagination, when we say tribe, the images that are evoked effortlessly are people who are primitive, people who are bound by a chief, and that's another word that is anthropologically loaded. They have kings, others have chiefs. So chief itself is associated with tribe, and tribe associated with primitivity. And those associations are made for people who are not white. So in my own personal space, my children and people who are associated with me never call ourselves tribe. And I wrote an article and said, my tribe, no, I don't have any. I belong to an ethnic group because the community I come from is not bound by one, we are not all united by blood ties. We do not have one chief. We have multiple kings that are independent. And there's a lot of complexity. And that's true for so many ethnic groups in Nigeria. And Chino Achebe made a point when he was asked about his tribe. He said, I don't belong to a tribe. I belong to an ethnic group. And they say, if that's too much, call me a nation. But tribe, no. If the English are not a tribe, if the Germans are not a tribe, no one else should be tribes. So for anyone who thinks that there's a difference between a tribe and an ethnic group and wants to see themselves as belonging to a tribe, that's a decision for you to make. And I respect that. But that word is not innocent. It is implicated in a lot of systematic exclusion and dehumanization. So my own advocacy is always to say, you are not a tribe, you are an ethnic group. Because the days when we were tribes, those days have gone. I mean, at some point, by the conception of what the word English, what the tribe means, we were tribes at some point. And in last point, in Australia, when the white people came from England to Australia, met the indigenous populations there, they saw them as primitives, they were called tribes, and they had a program called detribalization. And what did detribalization entail? They would take people from their homes, living with their parents in their natural communities, take them to white lands, civilize them so that they were detached from the tribes. And that was called detribalization. So they took a lot of children from their parents, took them to white foster homes, and then made them forget where they came from. And that was detribalization. So Nigerians say, oh, this guy is detribalized. And that confuses the hell out of a lot of native speakers because they think that process happened. You are taken away from your parents, from your hometown, taken to maybe the urban area where white people existed, and you're cured of whatever it was that you had. So when you say someone is detribalized, it means they are basically stripped of their culture and their language and their ways of life, the ways of lives of their ancestors. I just wanted to throw that out there. I hope the person who posed that question on Facebook is listening. It's not an innocent word.
Yeah, it's a great intervention there, and a corrective one as well, and very necessary. I want to, before we turn it over to the audience, I want to raise something. It's a question for you, Professor OlaOluwa. You've brilliantly laid out for us the why of the issue, why we've arrived at this juncture. The institutions and practices that are culpable, right, in this invisibilization process. You've outlined those institutions for us, and the stages from colonialism to post-colonial times, through the institution of the formal education curriculum, through the construction of textual narratives and tropes and stereotypes of that then formulate how certain groups are perceived and certain groups perceive themselves, the articulation of linguistic maps that exclude people, and the ways in which the language policy, the teaching of languages, also participate in that. But one thing, so we understand the broad picture of why this is the case, why this issue has persisted. But another dimension that you introduced that I want to push you on is the idea that minoritized and excluded people themselves seem to at some level participate in their own erasure. They seem to at some level make a decision, a pragmatic decision, I should say, to assimilate to the dominant majority identity by way of as a way of accessing certain opportunities, as a way of surviving in a suffocating ethnic majoritarian environment. That involves a certain amount of choice and agency on their part. I don't want to be excluded forever, and I don't want my children, my grandchildren to be excluded forever. Therefore, I am willing to sublimate who I am and what I am. If I need to change my name, if I need to alter my name, modify it and tweak it, if I need to assimilate to the majority culture, or in some cases, if I just need to hide who I am to get ahead and to access opportunities and resources that are due to me, then that's what I am going to do. So the question is, to what extent, if that is the case, to what extent then can we say that the victims of this majoritarian ethnic exclusion and tyranny, this minoritization process, have somehow contributed, to their own minoritization? To what extent, at least, are they responsible for perpetuating and continuing this process, as opposed to making a decision to break the cycle, as it were? That's the question that I wanted to put to you. It's a provocative one, but one that I wanted to hear your thoughts on.
All right. Thank you very much for that question, Prof. I think we'll have to begin this question from the angle of structural violence and its overwhelming purchase on these invisible minorities, vis-a-vis the audacity of what I call self-affirmation. Generally, from my own experience, what I have learned and discovered is that not many of these invisible minorities can stand this psychological pressure and trauma of being told of being, informed that they do not matter. I'll give you an instance. In 1986, my cousin's result was declared the best arts result in Ogun State. He's now Professor Jendele Humbo. So he became an Ogun State scholar and then wrote the UTME to Ogun State University, a university owned by the state. And then he applied to study law, and his name was number 3 on the merit list. But in the end, he was not admitted that year. Even when he showed them his award letter as the best student in Ogun State, they said, Mbo, that name does not sound Ogun State. He lost the admission. Now, at that point, you discover that not many people can stand that. And so it is against the backdrop of the structural violence, we begin to look at how they contribute to their own self-erasure. Absolutely, the self-erasure is often induced or forced on them. But it is also important to also acknowledge the place of the few who will stand their ground. I can argue, for instance, that on account of the pressure from the structural violence, what we call the core Lagos Island, Isaleku, blah, blah, blah. I can tell you that it's probably originally maybe 50% Ogun people.
Interesting.
But the pressure was so much that people began to change their names. I mean, a professor was saying that I am a Lagos Islander. And by the time he was telling us this, he was already answering a pure Yoruba name. And then he said, I was born and raised in Lagos Island. And in those days, in the 50s, stubborn children were threatened with Zangweto, the Ogun masquerade. That Zangweto was everywhere in Lagos Island. Today, you can't even find Zangweto anywhere in Lagos Island. So, and there was a particular year, a particular decade, I guess in the 60s or 70s, where a whole street was renamed. All the names were removed. And, it then takes the audacity of the few. And even the few, you discover that you also begin to talk about the hierarchies of their audacity. So some of them acknowledge to be quietly, do the little they can do without identifying with others and just walk away. A kid uncle of mine who read pharmacy at the then Ogun State University said it was only a few years ago he realized that why he thought he was the only Ogun person in his pharmacy class. Almost 20 years down the line, began to discover that there were 3 other Ogun classmates of his, including one that kept on taunting him. throughout their university days. Hey, Ogulasalasa, hey, this Omo Egu, you guys, you are not anything, you are nobody. And then he said years later, they got talking one day, and this lady, and then he said, I can't go that route with you. I'm just an ordinary man. And the lady said, hey, stop it. I have also just discovered that I am Ogu. And the guy said, like, seriously, are you kidding me? He said, and then he said, how did it happen? He said, granddad died in Abeokuta. Then the guy said, yes. And what happened? And then dad said he had to be taken to our homeland, somewhere in Ipokia local government in Ogun State. And then he said, yes. And then he said, and so we got there and discovered that it was then I discovered I was Ogu. And I just cannot understand why that hid that from me throughout, and to think that I insulted you all through our days in the university for being Ogu. Now I am Ogu. You begin to understand, the enormity of what we are talking about here. A few people would be audacious, no matter what, happens, to tell people that I owe nobody any apologies, but it's a bit tricky. But there is a new generation, I would say, lastly, fighting hard to see that, no matter what happens. I mean, like, I have found a way of making my children, take off from where I have stopped. They are born and raised, one born in Delta State, the others in Oyo State here, and we have never spent up to a week in the homeland. But they speak Gugbe the way a native would. When we chat on WhatsApp, they have never chatted to me in English. We have taken it to that level, and you find them defending. And I have also reversed the nominal disruption. So you're not going to find OlaOluwa in their names. So and so it takes that audacity, but all we can do is increase that number of the audacious because of the weight of structural violence.
Yeah. I absolutely love your framing of it as structural violence, because what it means is that when you have been minoritized and erased and forced into this identity, majoritarian identity formations, it's almost, you don't encounter institutions and practices that are receptive to who you truly are. You turn right, you turn left, you go backwards, you go to everywhere you go, basically. Society is saying to you, the dominant society is saying to you, what you are, Ugu identity is not welcome here, or we are not receptive to it, and that it will cost you to identify with Ugu. It will cost you, not just material things, but to go back to what Farooq was saying, it will cost you your psychic balance and your psychic self-assurance. So the price, it may be that the price is just too much, and the cost of being audaciously embracing who you are in those situations of majoritarian tyranny is just so much that it's probably not worth it. A lot of people consider it not worth it, and you can't blame them for that. But we have a question in the chat. Farooq, are there questions that we can access?
There are questions. I mean, there are a few questions, but I think Pius Fashion, through whom I connected with Professor OlaOluwa, said he said something here. If time permits, could you, talking to you, Professor OlaOluwa, comment on the recently observed sort of activism and cultural policing regarding Ogu people in such a way that we have seen increasing number of people coming public to assert their Ogu identity? And I think a good example is this Nollywood, famous Nollywood actor who has Yoruba and Igbo names. What's his name?
Arinze, Segun Arinze. Is that
Arinze. Yeah.
Oh, really? What did he say? What did he say? Did he say something about his?
Yeah, he wrote. I think I read somewhere that he says he's Ogu. So that was
It's actually an Ogu man.
First time. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow. So please, the question that Pius.
Before you answer, while you answer that, I also There's also what I like to call locational or geographic delegitimization as a strategy to other minorities that are international. For instance, the Batanu people and the Bokobaro people, most of us in Borogu also have cousins in Benin Republic, because as you know, these pre-colonial polities existed as units, and they were arbitrarily divided. And so people will tell us, if you are not Nigerians, you are Benin Republic, you are Beninois people. You don't belong in Nigeria. Although we've always lived here for thousands of years, but they would say, well, since the white man, and I imagine that you encounter that because the majority of Ogu people are in Benin Republic and Togo and Ghana, but mostly in Benin Republic. Is that something that Ogu people encounter, the othering using the location of where the majority people live? Is that something they also encounter? That's in addition to the what Pius asked. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Let me quickly begin with a Pius question. The question speaks to what I call natives. Anyway, not me now, so I am not accused of plagiarism. And that my response here will be a bit personal. Cultural policing is a linguistic term coined by my wife, Esther Senayon. Incidentally, excuse me, she's not Ogu. She's from Edo State, and she was the teacher who felt scandalized that after studying linguistics in the university, nobody ever told her about Ogu in Lagos State and Ogun State. I think my wife is also a bit crazy, in quotes, because that for her became the, what do I call it now, the turning point. And she made up her mind to say, if this guy, after about 3 hours of debate, could convince everybody in the end that he's a Nigerian, he's from Ogun State, he's OlaOluwa, yet he's not Yoruba, then I think I can go all the way with this guy, should he indicate any interest in me for whatever reason. And mind you, she was also my head of department who recruited me. But I didn't know what happened. But I think she fell for me just because of that debate. And then, and the rest is history. She's my wife today. And then she would proceed to conduct her master's research on Ogu and her PhD as well. And it was in the course of that master's research, to begin with, that she came up with the concept of cultural policing, because she recruited some field assistants to collect data on whether our people in my community were shifting to Yoruba or not. But prior to that time, I mean, from the pilot, I had convinced her that, oh, our people had changed a lot to Yoruba, and even in the villages, little children now pick up Yoruba as the first language, unlike what was the case in the 70s, while we were growing up, you could only learn Yoruba in school. And then data was brought back, and she discovered that everybody kept on saying that, oh, no, they don't speak. Oh, no, we don't speak Yoruba at home. We speak Ogu, we speak Ogu. And it became a big issue between her and her professor that you have doctored data. And then she came back worried until I kept on asking her questions. So who led this field investigation for you? Then you mentioned the name. And then said, oh, now I know. That guy belongs to the elite who have taken it upon themselves to re-educate our people in the villages, to stop speaking to Yoruba, to shift back to Ogu. And so they saw him as some sort of cultural police. And when he was involved in the interview, they would not say they were speaking Yoruba. And that became sufficient ground for my wife to explore that at the PhD level, where she defines cultural policing as the mobilization of cultural elements by native speakers, elite native speakers, towards language shift reversal. And that has played out a lot. Every time I go home, everybody is surprised that in spite of obtaining a PhD, I'll go home, I attend village square meetings, and I speak for 2-3 hours without inserting just one English word or one Yoruba word. And people became motivated. In fact, it became a case of double shame, as her research indicates. Shame in the first place made them to shift to Yoruba, and shame again is making them shift back because the learning people return home and speak the language. Even those of them who have spent years in Europe and America come back home, they bring their children home, and their children raised in America and Europe speak the language. And then, so on account of this second stage shame, they are back to the language. And that has transformed a lot of things. And in our own generation, you hardly now find people who answer Senayon and OlaOluwa at the same time. My children are, just answer Maume Senayon, Onutengbe Senayon. The middle name would just be Ishan because their mom is. And so that is that question of agency, and that is what my wife references as native speaker to native speaker agency, which makes language cultural policing, according to her, remarkably different from language activism. And now to your question regarding locational legitimization, I was going to come to that in my original, talk, and now you have brought it up. And that is when I suggest that we need to also problematize invisibility. Sometimes visibility is not thoroughly positive, especially in the case of minority groups. And I think that is I can relate to your experience. If you are by an international border and you have this unique name, then you know that you are visible. If an Ogun man is traveling from Badagry in Nigeria to Maitu or Lagos Island, he is visible all the way because the immigration officers, the immigration personnel are going to stop every commercial vehicle and say, okay, yes, identify yourself. The moment you say you are Gose Godonu, the immigration officer asks you to come down. You are a foreigner. Who, no matter who you are, even if you are a professor, he just by dint of your name, he tells you are a foreigner. I put it to you that you are a foreigner. If my people are traveling from Ipokia local government to Lagos, every time they are stopped, they are harassed. And we have a large number of our people who till today can't make a simple sentence in Yoruba. And the moment they can't speak Yoruba, so it's like if you are Nigerian and you are from the Southwest, you must speak Yoruba. The moment they ask you questions in Yoruba, and your Yoruba is with an accent, or you can't even be coherent. You are stopped, you are harassed, you are robbed in some cases, you are tortured, you are taken to the police station, you are arrested, you are detained. That, for me, is a form of visibility in the negative sense.
Yeah.
That same visibility applies to what happens when you are applying for the Nigerian passport. The moment you go into the immigration office and your name is Agbo Medeton, the immigration officer just looks at you and tells you you are a foreigner. That happens in Lagos State. It happens in Ogun State. Surprisingly, a few weeks ago, it still happens in Oyo State. A PhD student at the University of Ibadan has just won a travel grant to Algeria or Morocco, I cannot remember, and excitedly told me about it and went to apply in Agodi in Ibadan here for the passport. And by the way, he's Olusegun. There is a Yoruba name, and the surname is Ahisu, the Ogun name. And just because of Ahisu, he was told, no, you are a foreigner. You can't convince us. The fact that you are a student of University of Ibadan does not make you a Nigerian. You will now have to go to your local government,
your
for
hometown.
for your traditional ruler to identify you as a Nigerian, and the traditional ruler will be a Yoruba.
Which is an additional burden of proof.
Exactly.
To nobody else.
So we encounter this every day. Somebody looks at you and just tells you you are a Ghanaian. You are from Benin Republic. The other day, my daughter was writing an exam. I think was it the GS3 exam, and then the invigilator was moving around the hall, and then saw her name, Maume Senayon. Just imagine the psychological torture. I just said, hey, you are not a Nigerian. I put it to you that you are from Togo. What is that supposed to mean?
Unbelievable.
So I told my daughter, the next time anybody tries that, just tell them, sir, you are Owolabi Adejare. I also put it to you that you are from Togo or Republic of Benin, because here is the West African map. There are indigenous Yoruba people in Nigeria, they are in Benin Republic, they are in Togo. Can you also prove to me that you are not a Togolese? So our neighbors accept that they are indigenous to Benin Republic and to Togo. There is no problem about that. But they don't admit that we are indigenous to Nigeria. When our people are coming from Badagry or Ipokia to Lagos, and there are people, Benin Republic nationals, who answer Adewale, Adejare, the immigration officers let them go. And the truth of the matter is that there are Yoruba people in Benin Republic who work in Nigeria with the Nigerian government and travel back to Benin every weekend. Some even come from Benin Republic to work in Nigeria every day. So long as they answer Yoruba names, they don't have any problems. But the moment our people are, engaged in the auto mobility, they become visible, not invisible in this context, and that visibility is negative. Thank you.
So we are going to go to Oluwaseun Williams because his hand has been up for quite a while.
I'm sure there are a few other people who want to. So maybe let's give more time for intervention for other people's experiences, because we are getting close to.
Yeah, we are running out of time. So we should go to Oluwaseun Williams to. Yeah. If you can keep your comments brief, that we will really appreciate it, because we are really running out of time. There are also some interesting comments here. So let me read this one comment, and then we'll go to Sean Williams. It says the structural violence still persists bloodily, violently. A case in point is the recent destruction, demolition, displacement, and death of Ogu people in Makoko, Lagos State. So I want you to respond to that after Sean Williams makes his intervention. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Williams.
Oh, have you unmuted him?
No, he should. I think
okay.
I have to unmute
no,
himself.
You have to.
Oh, I have
okay.
to do it.
I have to do that.
Okay, ask to unmute, or is that?
Ask to unmute. Yeah.
Ask to unmute. Okay. All right. So now you can unmute yourself. Yes. Please go.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much, Professor Senayon. So I just wanted to add something on top of some of the layers that everyone here has already established, and it's about spelling system, like orthography. And I think that Professor Kperogi may be able to relate on this. So there are two different writing systems for an Ogu person. So Professor Senayon, his name could also be spelled because of the French colonization in Benin Republic. His name could be, that Senayon could be spelled as CHE or TCHEGNAYON. O-N. And simply because of this orthography, so the she sound or the she sound can be TCH or CH, and the the Y sound can be GN. And simply because of that orthographic differences, a lot of our people have been denied their own personhood and all of their every kind of opportunities. And this is even becoming very, very pronounced with the documentation and digitization of identities, with BVN and NIN. So you want to go for your NIN, and because your name has the K sound, but it is written with KP, you are told that you are not a Nigerian. Then you are asked to go and bring certificate of indigenship from Ibale, and then you get that. Then you are told to get another one from the king, and then you get that. Then you get a third layer from the local government, and then you get that. And then you go to LASU and you want to get admission, and you are asked to come for indigenship verification exercise. And when you get there, you present all these things with your NIN, the NIN that you got after a lot of problems, right? And then they still tell you that you are not a Nigerian. And then you are asked to speak the language. Then you speak it. Then somebody says, the way you speak this language, it is too authentic. It means you cannot be living in Badagry and speak a very conk Ogu or very conk Gungbe like this. You must be coming from Benin Republic. And then you are asked to bring your father. And this is a very real story. You are asked to bring your father. Your father comes, and then you are asked to go and even bring, because your father does not have any papers to his name and everything. You are asked to actually go and bring the picture of your grandfather's burial ground. This is a very, very real story. Yes. And this particular lady was denied admission twice at LASU because of this. After presenting all this documentation from Nigeria. So I just wanted to add that layer of the orthographic system and how it is used to institutionally and structurally disenfranchise our people.
Yeah, but that is a great intervention, Dr. Williams, because it means that that's another layer of exclusion. That's another layer of erasure that people don't often realize, because we've normalized, or maybe our educational system, this Anglo-centric educational system and orthographic system has normalized a certain way of spelling names that we don't even recognize.
I can relate.
Yeah.
My own experience as a border person, doesn't reflect this. But I recall when in 2016, when I took my family home, I told my wife I wanted to see the other part of in Benin Republic. As we were crossing, the immigration officers were our people. We spoke the same language. I thought I could be friendly and speak the language, but when they realized that, they initially thought I was Igbo. When I spoke the language, just to strike familiarity, they switched to French, and they wanted to collect money from me. It turned out, and we had already left the Nigerian side, was a Yoruba person who happens to be a fan of my column. That was just some random thing. I didn't know. When he saw me, he said, "Oh, is that you?" He brought it back. So he worked. He was a senior military officer. He went there. He said, "This is your son. Well, you are all the same people, but you are preventing him from crossing over just because of what you want to get money from him." And they respected him. It was his intervention that allowed them to the maiden allow us to go into Nikki. That's the cultural headquarters of the Borobu people in that part of. So we have them, and what you said, like Sabi, which is this is a name for the second son in Borobu, all of Borobu, including the Sabe people who are Yoruba people. They bear our names. They spell it there as Chabi, Chabi, but we spell it as Sabi. So there are these orthographic differences that yes, you are right, Dr. Williams, that those of us from border communities, especially French, and even Nigerians, Hausa, and Chadian, Kanuris, and or no, they can, they deal with those sort of issues. But yours is a little extreme, the way it's carried out. I think it's, I don't think other border communities experience this sort of violence.
So in the
We have
time
a few more minutes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
we have a. So
Inyene.
Professor OlaOluwa, could you speak briefly about this the Makoko issue? Somebody, Lanre Adeogun raised it, the destruction
All right. Yes.
of Ugu people.
The Makoko issue. Incidentally, I have been personally involved in the protest against the demolition. I have participated in several meetings with the Lagos State House of Assembly Committee investigating the demolition. I even joined the legislators to physically visit, the demolished parts of the river. But the truth of the matter is that all that is happening to my people just because they are the invisible minority in Lagos. These were people who most certainly had been there before even the Yoruba would come. And I'm saying this at the risk of sounding controversial. If you know that Badagry is just a few kilometers away from, Lagos Island, you know how long it would take somebody to come from Ife or Yo to hit Lagos, unless they are coming from Shabe in Benin Republic. And of course, there are so many Lagos Island Yoruba people who came from Benin Republic, and then together with their Ogu neighbors from Badagry. But today they tend to construct our people in foreigners. And that's the challenge we have. Even when all the court cases are in their favor, the government thinks they do not belong. The government thinks they are not Lagosian enough. At other times, you find people saying stuff like, yes, they speak Ogu, but the Ogu they speak does it sound Nigerian Ogu? What is the meaning of that? So these are some of the challenges that we continue to encounter. I remember during one of the sessions at the Lagos State House of Assembly, I put a question to them that went viral, that today you are demolishing this place the way you did about 10 years ago when you demolished another waterfront community owned by the Ogu. Another waterfront community that you have now given one fanciful name as an estate, something Spring Estate now. But that's Otto Dogbame. Otto Dogbame in somewhere in Lekki is pure. The name itself they could not even change. Otto Dogbame, meaning a city in a marshy land. That is what it means in Ogu. Even when you talk about Aja, the elite Aja in Lekki, Aja, nobody has been able to change it because it is the Ogu people who are Aja speaking people. We Ogu people are Aja. But today, you aren't even going to find any Ogu person there. But we know that in history, the Aja speaking people are Ogu people. But so this is the way the structural violence works. You construct our people in foreigners, so you take over their property, you take over their land just because they are the invisible minorities. And of course, when you call up our people to even defend themselves in Yoruba, and then when they go to court, they are subjected to speaking Yoruba, in which they can never be fluent, and then they lose out.
So I hate to
these are some of the
interject.
challenges.
I hate to interject because we have 8
more minutes. I think there's
going to give a chance to
we ask.
Okay. But she or he has to keep it very brief.
Yeah, please have a very quick.
I want to read one question.
Pius wants to speak too, and he made the connection possible. I want to give him a chance to also say a few things.
All right.
So, but
so if you can be, let me see. Ask to
if you can be brief, okay.
Yeah, if you can be brief, you can unmute yourself now.
Okay, good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thanks very much for this seminar. I'll be very quick because I know we have limited time. Thank you, all the profs. in the room. Prof. Senayon is my professor. I study under him. He's my supervisor. I'm studying diaspora studies, so I'm very, very proud. Almost everyone calls him Prof. Senayon. No one really calls him Prof. OlaOluwa as far as I know. So, but listening to this now, I think that's even very significant. I just really want to talk about the whole idea of erasure and even well just my experience as well. Prof. Ochonu, you spoke when you started about the Calabar um idea, and yeah, this whole thing also applies, the whole erasure. As someone who is from a
That
Ibom
term
state.
is a term of erasure, obviously. I was just using it
Yeah,
as a convenient term, obviously.
so yeah, exactly. So you see that's really the thing, right? Because there is no such thing as Calabar people.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you say Calabar people, that's just like saying, oh, okay, Makurdi people or
Yeah.
Ibadan people. There's no ethnic group
Mhm.
like Calabar. And so many times Nigerians just subsume the whole
Mhm.
thing, oh, Calabar people. But in Cross River State, there are hundreds. In Akwa Ibom
Oh,
State, where I'm from, I'm Ibibio. There is Ibibio, there's Oron, there's Anang, there's Eket, there's Obolo, there's different. Cross River State, over 100. And
wow.
so, that idea of Calabar people does not exist. And in many ways, we're really all guilty of this, tracing it back to colonialism and all. And I really love the statement where Prof said that we just classify Nigerian ethnogeographic identities into, we like to think of it as neat categories, but they're not always that clear cut. And the thing is, no one really sits in one place. People are always migrating. So these things are not that clear cut. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. And yeah, well done.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And we need to also realize that I like what you said, we are all guilty in certain ways because even our conversational language that we adopt in talking about, sometimes we are not even aware that when we use some of these categories, we are excluding people. We don't mean, and we don't have any sinister intentions, but we need to stop and think sometimes about who we are excluding or who we are erasing. When we say Calabar person, the people in Calabar that I know are the dominant ethnic group. There's a dominant ethnic group there. We are privileging them. If you say Calabar and you group everybody in these two states under that rubric, that ethnic rubric, you are. So thank you for that intervention. There's one question here, Farooq, that I would say, Professor Sadiq Abdullahi, if we can just
Okay.
read it.
Well, but there's, can we give, before we go to Sadiq
Oh,
Abdullah?
you say Pius? Yeah, please go ahead.
Pius, I'm trying to look for him now.
Yeah, let's see him.
Have you
Pius,
seen Pius?
Pius,
Okay,
first,
ask him to unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
yes, we can
Yes, we
hear
can
you.
hear him.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I like the tone of this discussion because my initial concern was I don't want it to sound like minorities appearing to project victimhood as if they are being oppressed by other people in Nigeria. But I like the tone, the scholarly angle we all come from. But one thing that I want to bring our attention to, especially as exemplified in Lagos and Ogun State specifically, is that because of this these issues we are talking about, there is this cultural assimilation that kind of erase traditional leadership. So one typical example of it in Ogun State is like if you are going to be a traditional ruler in an Ogun community, for example, by the time you get to the local government, for example, they ask questions like, where in Ife did you guys come from? Where has your, what do you call this? Where has your crown come from in Ife? So which in itself may already assume that everyone in the southwest originated from Ife. And of course, most of the people who do this thing know it, but the politics of it, because it favors the majority group, I mean, it has been that has been established, and so you're going to have a lot of traditional rulers in Ogun State, in Ogun communities, right, who have laid claim to have originated from Ife. You're going to have that. Otherwise, you're going to have non-Ogu people as traditional rulers. I mean, which it doesn't really make sense. You can't lead a tradition that you don't belong to, but you're going to have non-Ogu people who are traditional rulers in Ogu communities in Ogun State, for example. And then, but again, the global perspective of it, I usually read it in this Professor Ashaju's book, paper that he published about just speaking people, where he tried to remind us that we used to run kingdoms before the colonial time, and so you will see when you draw the map where Eve used to be comprised in Togo and part of Ghana, and then the division that happened because took over colonialism of Togo, and then English took over the colonialism of Ghana. So the Volta region inherited a part of Togo as a result of the World War was over and German lost. So Germany was the original colonialist leader of Togo. So because of that, even till today, you still have Ewe people fighting in Volta region to become Togoland, to break away from Ghana because of what they perceive as minoritization. Anyway, thank you for the discussion, and really enjoyed it. That's a comment from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read this.
1 minute left.
Is he going to kick us out, Farooq? Does this
No, it will not.
not? So I want to beg the audience that to take this question that was asked by Professor Sadiq, and I would like to get a comment from Professor Senayon on it. He says,
okay, read it. Okay.
He says, I'm skipping a whole bunch of things, but I'll go straight to the question. I think it's important. Who determines and controls the curriculum in Nigeria? And what is the role of state government in shaping the curriculum at primary and secondary schools? Because that was central, Prof, to your comment on erasure and how the curriculum and the school culture is implicated in this erasure of the Ugu people. And the curricular question is what he's trying to get at. How does that happen that Ugu is not taught, and then a lot of Yoruba fiction, literature, all kinds of things, history is imposed on, all of that curricular question. So that's what he's asking.
I think Professor Sadiq will be he's the professor of educational psychology.
Oh, is he?
Of educational curriculum. Maybe he.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Prof, you are muted. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so let him speak to. He can verbalize. So he's with.
All right. Oh, sorry about that. Yes. Basically, we all do know that even when we talk about education, we're talking about political power. Political agency frames every other form of the social strata. And that is exactly what has happened. We are in Lagos and Ogun State. Let me just illustrate with, an area I am familiar with. In Ogun State, for instance, since its establishment in 1976, we've not had, I think it was only 2 or 3 years ago, we had a commissioner who was also shortly thereafter demoted to maybe an agency chairman, and a few months ago has been thrown out. So when people sit in the educational boardroom to determine who is where, what is taught and what is not taught, in most cases it is 100% Yoruba people. And that goes, some years back, I think Thursday was declared as the day for legislation in Yoruba in Lagos State. Nobody will ever create a date for, but of course, we keep on pushing, we keep on agitating, because there was a time that news was not cast in Ogun, in Lagos and Ogun State. But our people kept on pushing, kept on kicking. So we are hopeful that we keep on kicking until all this. But for now, those who determine what is taught are almost 100% Yoruba, and that is the truth of the matter.
And that logic applies everywhere across Nigeria as well. So it's not just state.
Yeah.
Whenever you have majority formations, they are in the room. They determine what.
But it gets even more complicated at the national level, because the insistence that students be taught in Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo at secondary school level excludes hundreds of
other languages.
And in taking that decision, I don't know whether there are no Edo people, for instance, there. In Edo, almost everyone speaks some version of Edo, or what's that? What's the wife's language again? I'm trying to remember.
Ishan.
Yeah, Ishan. Which are sort of mutually intelligent. They're the same language book. So no one has raised objection to this Wazobiization of the country to the exclusion of others. And it's almost like learning another foreign language. I recall that in my own time, we resisted learning any language, any of the three languages, because we said that's additional internal colonialism. Apart from our language, we have to understand this other language on top of English. We said no. And so we did not, and everyone resisted it. But I don't think that's happening in most other places.
No, it's been normalized. It's been internalized and accepted, and a lot of people sit for JAMB and what's the other, WAEC, and
Exactly, they just do it and then they move on. It's so
they
unfortunate.
just go through the motion. It's one of those things. So, but this has been an insightful, and Farooq, do we have any question from Facebook that is worthy in the last minute?
No, I think someone was asking when you mentioned the numbers in Ogu, the person found similarities between what you said and Yala language in Cross River.
Cross River.
Yala is in Cross River, right?
It's in Cross River, yeah. I know.
Yeah, but I don't think I think Yala is closer to Idoma than it is to.
Yeah, it's a sort of offshoot of Idoma. Yeah. Okay, well, Prof. Senayon, thank you very much for shedding so much light on this issue, for helping us to understand not just the Ugu example, but also the other examples that instantiate this minoritization issue, this invisibilization issue. Truly, I've learned a lot. I'm sure our audience have learned a lot as well. We're going to end the conversation here. We'll come to you again next month with another topic and another panel. So join us next month. Thank you, Prof. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.